Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you guys an update on my Larch Bonsai here. So this here is a hybrid larch, so it's quite a vigorous, strong growing larch, but I've been transforming it into a bonsai for the last few years. And this is the first year it's actually started to flower. So I'll give you a close up of the flowers in a minute. But I haven't root pruned this for about 2 or 3 years now, and it desperately needs root pruning. I'm going to show you what the roots are like on the bottom. They're really starting to grow out the bottom of the pot there, and then form like a mat on the outside of the pot. So I definitely need to do a little bit of root pruning. I'm always a bit hesitant with root pruning with my larch because there is quite a lot of top growth compared with the amount of root growth. What I could really do with doing is upsizing this pot slightly because it's now got to the stage where the pot size is a little bit small for the size of the top growth. Although with bonsai you always want to keep quite a small pot size anyway, just keep it a bit less vigorous and keep the growth down. So most springs I tend to wire this up. I don't think I'm going to do any wiring this time because, to be honest, most of the branches last season that did grow since I last wired it have grown roughly where I wanted them to grow, so they're looking quite good. When it comes to pruning as well, there's not a lot of pruning to do today. I'm going to do a tiny bit. There's a couple of branches which are kind of crossing over, or maybe they're growing in a slightly odd direction, or maybe they're a bit longer than I'd like. I'd like some more back branching. So I'll do a little bit of pruning. The lower branches I'm keeping though, because I'm trying to get a bit more of a taper on the trunk. Eventually the style I'm going for is I want the branches around this kind of height to be the longest, then slowly getting shorter and shorter as you go to the top. And I'd like to have the bottom probably 5-10 centimeters to be completely clear of branches to look more like a mature tree. But I'm keeping those mature branches for now, just to help thicken the lower trunk and have a more of a nice taper appearance. So I'll show you a close-up now of what the flowers look like. I'm quite surprised this is flowering because this isn't a very old plant. I think this is about 5 or 6 years old, this plant. But I think because I've been growing it as a bonsai, it feels like it's an older plant. It feels more mature. Basically, when you bonsai a plant and you make it a bit stressed, it tends to make the plant grow more like it would as if it was a mature plant, which is why I think we're getting some flowers and shoots now. My parents' larch tree, I'll show you a picture now. That's a similar age, but it hasn't got any flowers at all this year, and you can see it's much bigger. So it just shows you the effect of bonsaiing a tree can make it mature a bit faster and have flowers at a younger age than it would normally. So it's not the flowers themselves I'm so excited about, it's the fact that I might actually get some small cones on this. One of the nice things with the cones on a larch tree is they actually have very small cones, or at least very small compared with many of the other conifers. That kind of helps with the bonsai effect. So there's 2 different types of flowers you get on the larch tree. Basically there's male flowers and female flowers. This one here, this is the female flower. It basically looks a little bit like a small cone, and it generally keeps that shape as it grows, and as long as this gets pollinated. I don't know how many other larches are in my area. There's a lot in my district, but in the actual town where I'm living I haven't seen any nearby, so I'm not sure if this is going to get pollinated or not. Also there's a chance this could self-pollinate. I'm not sure if this will. If it does self-pollinate, then I should get some cones forming. If they don't get pollinated, this flower will fall off in a few weeks time and won't develop into anything. If pollination is successful, I should see it grow slightly bigger, probably about 3 or 4 times the size it is now, and go more of a brown colour, and then I'll know it's actually been successful with the cone. And then as for the male flower, you can actually see it just in this section on the left here. It looks a little bit similar, it's just a tiny bit smaller than the female flower. This won't get any bigger, and it'll have little white anthers on it which has the pollen, and it's spread by the wind, the pollen, so the pollen can go quite a distance. So even if I don't have any larch nearby where I am, pollen could blow from a couple of miles away, so there's still a chance that my female flowers could get pollinated, or as I say, this one could blow onto the female if it can self-pollinate. So this will fall off very quickly. This will only last a couple of weeks and then fall off, and there won't be any sign that I had any male flowers on this, but that's what they look like. I haven't got many male flowers, but I've got a lot of female flowers. And the female flowers I'd want more than the other ones, to be honest, because then I'll get all the cones. The male flowers, they don't last. And there's quite a few female flowers at the moment, so I think I'm going to get quite a few cones, and they all tend to be at the top of the plant at the moment, which is quite common on larch trees. It tends to be on the younger growth. So looking at the top section here, you can see there's 5 cones towards the top, and then further down I have got 2 more cones. So I've got one down here and one a bit further down. So they are clustered generally in this area, but it looks like I'll probably have about 7 cones in total, which will be good if they all set seed, but we'll just have to see if they get pollinated and if they will last or not. So I'm just going to carry out some minor pruning now. There's a few branches such as this one here. You can see when it comes along from the stem, I don't want the leading branch to be so long. That should really be shorter than the ones behind it. Naturally on the tree you have these older branches slightly longer than the younger branches. So I want to cut these side ones off, and I'm going to do that around the whole tree. I'm going to cut quite hard on the top ones because naturally the tree wants to put most of its growth into the top growth because it wants to grow into a large tree. So I'll cut all the top ones quite severely. The lower down ones I won't prune much at all because I want them to get wider, and the ones at the bottom I won't prune at all because the tree naturally is trying not to let them grow, but I want them to grow so I can get some thickening of the trunk at the bottom. So that's about as much as I want to prune for now. I did actually want to prune this one off here slightly more, but there's the cone right at the end there. I didn't want to lose my cone there. Once that cone's fallen off next year, I'll probably shorten that one slightly, just to keep the top appearance looking a bit better. Now I'll also take off the wires. The wires have finished doing what they needed to do. There's only a couple. There's one at the top. That was because I needed to train in a new leader. So what this had is the top growth had become too large last year, so I cut the top growth off, but then I had no leading shoot, so it looked a bit odd. So what I did is I trained one of the side shoots up as a leader, and that's worked quite well. I just used the wires to send it upwards. It's now fixed in that position because it's thickened up, so I don't need that wire anymore, so I can take that off. But I need to try and match it in a little bit better eventually. I might have to cut down some of this actually to have this as more of a leader, because at the moment it looks a bit odd with this bit coming off the top, some higher up from the natural leader. So that's the top section now cut off. It still comes out at a slight bit of an angle to the side. As this thickens as time goes on, this should be less noticeable and look more like a just continuation of the branch there. Ideally you wouldn't have it going from so thick to so thin, but over time I'm probably going to upsize this bonsai slightly, and then that should gradually be reduced and you won't notice the difference as much. So I also need to do some root pruning. The roots have really got too big now. I need a bit of work done. Now normally I don't like moss growing on my bonsai plants because I like to have all the nutrients that the bonsai plants can get. The moss will take some of the nutrients away from it. Admittedly not much because it's not a heavy feeding plant, but I've actually quite liked the way it looks at the moment. There's loads of moss over it. It looks really nice. So I'll try and keep that if I can. It depends, though when I'm root pruning it I might need to take some of the moss off just to have a look at the roots and see how they're doing. So I'm just going to go ahead now, take it out of the pot, see how it looks, and I'll start trimming some of the roots. One thing I need to do with this is cut the wire. I did actually wire the tree in because it's quite a large tree. I've got wires tied around the bottom of the trunk to hold it in position when I last root pruned it. So I need to trim these wires off in order to get this out of the pot. So it does seem incredibly well rooted, and also there's a bit of a lip on the on this bonsai pot which is making it a bit difficult. So I'm just going to go around the edge now and try and tease it out because it's proving quite difficult to take the root system out. So as you can see from that, there's quite an extensive mass of roots. They're all spiralling around the bottom. I need to cut off all these spiraling roots. They're not good at all for the plant, so I'm just going to tease them down and then cut them off. What I want is a much healthier root system. I don't want all these kind of large spiraling roots. I want to find a root system with lots of small roots, but ones that aren't spiraling around the pot. When they start spiraling around the pot, they all get congested like this, and they're not really in soil, they're just wrapped around themselves, so they can't get the water and the nutrients they need. What you want them is in the soil, that way they can get the water and the nutrients. So I'm also going to try and tease a few of these roots out, see if there's any large ones that need to be removed. I don't want any large roots to form. In the wild, plants grow large roots for stability, but you don't want the large roots when it comes to bonsai because you don't need that stability. You're giving it all the protection it needs, and if you get large roots they don't actually help much with the plant. The large roots, they can't absorb any nutrients, it's just for stability, so you cut them off. So cutting them off will encourage lots of smaller roots to appear. Those smaller roots will be the feeder roots, and they'll be the ones that absorb all the nutrients for the plants. So the rest of those roots don't look too bad. I've only repotted this about 2 years ago, so I'm not going to bother taking out all the soil and redoing the whole thing. I don't think that's necessary. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of soil in the bottom of the pot here. What I need to do probably next season, or maybe even later in the summer as this grows, is actually upsize this, put it in a bigger bonsai pot. As I said before, this is really getting a bit too small for it now. So for now, I'm just going to put some fresh compost in the bottom to replace where those roots were. And I'm also going to carefully remove the support wire. There's quite a stable base now the plant has, so it doesn't need the support wire. You can see it just there on the trunk. If I leave that for too long, it will start to cut into the trunk and start damaging it. So I'm just going to remove that just to prevent any damage in the future. And I want to pull all the wire out of the pot as well, because just cutting it from the top, they could still be wrapped around the roots. So just remove all that wire. So that's the larch now back in its pot. It wasn't major root pruning I've done today. I think, as I said before, I need to do some major root pruning at some point. I've just taken off all the spiraling roots and refreshed some of the compost. Probably in the next video I'm going to upsize it because it really needs a bigger pot now. But I'm quite happy with how it's done. It's looking quite good now. There is a bit of a curve in the trunk. I might try and straighten that at some point, I'm not sure. Sometimes it looks nice to have not a completely straight trunk. It gives it a bit more character. So that's something I can always think about and maybe work on in the future. And we'll just have to see how these new shoots come in. Normally when you do root pruning, it weakens the growth temporarily as you take not a lot of the roots. The plant refocuses its efforts onto regrowing those roots instead of putting on new top growth. Then once the new roots are formed, because there are lots of fine feeder roots, the plant actually becomes more vigorous. So what I should find with this is it won't grow much over the beginning of summer. Then midsummer, once the roots are established, this will probably start growing quite vigorously. At that point, I'll probably think about resizing this, getting it into a slightly bigger pot so I can upsize it slightly. It's a nice size at the moment, but I would like to upsize it just a little bit. I think it would just look nicer, especially with that top shoot being a little bit crooked. So that's all for this bonsai update on my larch tree. It's been doing quite well the last few years. This one I always have to keep outside. It is native to cold areas. We get lots of it growing here in Scotland, even though it's not native, but we've got a perfect climate for it. We've got cool summers, which it quite likes because it comes from the mountainous areas. And we had -15 last winter. I didn't give this any protection at all. Even the roots went down to -15, and has had absolutely no issue at all. It's a really hardy plant when it comes to cold temperatures. The main issue I have with this is drought. If I do ever get hot, dry weather in summer, I have to water this almost every single day because it is a mountainous plant. It likes cool, damp conditions, and in a small pot it will dry out very quickly. But fortunately here in Scotland we don't have hot, dry weather very often, so it seems to really like the climate here. So that's all for this update, and I'll give you guys another update probably in midsummer when I'm looking into repotting this and maybe just doing a little bit of pruning if there's anything that's growing too vigorously in the middle of summer.